This is KTVO's Good Morning Heartland.
Welcome back. Research shows 2.4 to 4.5 million Americans have Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia in the elderly. Yet many people struggle with determining what is a fact and what is a myth. Here to break it all down for us is Dr. Justin Puckett with Complete Family Medicine. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Now, this is something really serious. Either, we know someone who has experienced this that we're dealing with ourselves, or a friend or a family member that has someone, and it can be really traumatizing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And oftentimes in the beginning stages, it can have quite the toll on the patient themselves, the one who's suffering from the disease, because they have some cognition still left that they are recognizing these things and maybe even trying to cover up these things because they see them but don't know what to do about them. And then for the rest of us on the outside, we can see the severe impact that it takes on the entire family, it can be quite taxing.
Absolutely. So we're going to go through these myths here. So the first one, it only happens to older people.
Most of it does happen, most incidents of Alzheimer's does happen over the age of 65, but more than 5% happens in the age of under 50. It's not rare for there to be a diagnosis that happens even in the 40s and even a bit rarer, but in the 30s. So it's not just age related. We don't really fully understand the cause of Alzheimer's. We know that it has to do with some plaque formation in the brain and that it can have a lot of genetic connections and environmental connections, but doesn't have to be just in those people that are in their last decade or two of life. It can happen all the way from 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way up.
Interesting. So number two, it's a normal part of aging.
Yeah, that's a big misconception. As we age, we certainly have a little bit of memory loss that we're not quite as sharp as we used to be. But that's the extent of normal aging. So if we get to the point where we're really losing our orientation, we're making common mistakes that we never would have made before, or even making what we might even consider like a silly mistake of we find our keys and we put our keys away in the refrigerator, something that just doesn't have any logical sense to it. That's definitely not normal aging. And so the idea that, we're all going to, have Alzheimer's if we live old enough isn't really true. I've got some really sharp 90-year-old patients out there that I tell you what, I think they're sharper than I am, but it isn't just age-related.
So now with that, would you say, because it's so hard to tell what's something that, I forgot my keys, it's just something that happens on a, average basis, but not too common. Would they talk to a doctor and kind of break it down? Yeah,
absolutely. We have a little questionnaire that we do that takes about 2 minutes called the Slums test. And it's just a basic questionnaire of asking some memory questions. And the score itself that we get there isn't so meaningful, but we love to see it over time. So we try to do that every few years. And if we see a decline in that number nice and steady, then that can mean something to us. And it's actually a pretty objective way to identify the signs and symptoms a bit early.
Interesting. So now number three, it doesn't lead to death.
Yeah, people think that, I'll get Alzheimer's and as long as I'm taken care of, it's not going to kill me. And that's not really true. It's the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. Now, a lot of times the deaths are secondary to comorbidities that come with the Alzheimer's. Whenever we get into the severe stages of Alzheimer's, we just don't care to eat, we don't care to drink, we don't care to get up and move and do some of the things that we normally do, so we're much more susceptible to getting dehydration and having protein calorie malnutrition and those sorts of things. And so it can become the disease of Alzheimer's will definitely shorten your life, the average person who's diagnosed only lives 8 to 10 years after that.
It's sad.
And then not to mention the deaths that happen from accidents, from wandering and that sort of thing.
Of course.
Because in the heartland, unfortunately we hear about those cases, every once in a while, and they're quite tragic.
And now, what is something that you can do for that type of, thing that's going to happen or potentially could happen? How do you take the necessary precautions? Yeah,
that's another one of the myths about that the medications are, that we've got these medications and that they're a cure-all, amazing, and they really do help. They will help people with some of their memory, some of their cognition, some of their abilities to reason. But unfortunately, the medicines are fairly short-lived in their efficacy. The studies show a year or two of benefit. We do like to think that maybe it slows the progression just a bit, but it doesn't really, there's nothing out there right now that stops or cures the disease. And so aside from those of us that are younger and at risk, we need to be keeping our mind busy, we need to be keeping socially active, we need to not isolate ourselves. Doing a variety of different brain puzzles, doing Sudoku, all those sorts of things are great. If grandma's got a computer, get her on there and just Google brain exercises, and there'll be all kinds of free games that can be played, and they're quite entertaining, but keeps your mind going, keeps your mind moving. And if we know it's one of those things, just like many things, if we don't use it a little bit, then we can lose it a little bit easier. And so it's not a cure-all, but it certainly is. Those are some things that can do to help.
So now that kind of tailors to myth number 4, right? That there are treatments to help it stop from getting worse? Or...
Yeah, those medicines don't really stop the progression overall. They can put a little pause for a second, and you can see a little bump in performance. But and we use them extensively, but they are not going to overall stop the progression. There's no time out when it comes to Alzheimer's.
And lastly, we also have myth number 5, that it's caused by aluminum flu shots or silver fillings.
Yeah, we get that all the time. People are wanting to get their teeth out to get those silver fillings out or whatever because they've heard once that there was a connection there. And the science just doesn't show that right now. And actually vaccinations, for example, when people who are vaccinated have a lower incidence of Alzheimer's, probably just because they don't get as sick, they live, they're able to stay active a little bit more, stay engaged. But there's no connection to any of those things, everything from aluminum to metal fillings, flu shots. We really don't have a connection. The only real causative thing that we can put our finger on, again, is not using our brain as much. And outside of that, this is an early science where we're learning about what happens with those tau proteins in the brain and how they form the plaques. And so there's a lot of stuff coming out there. We're hopeful that we'll have more of there's even talk of an Alzheimer's vaccine. We know that if that people who have, especially men who have testosterone replaced, have a little bit lower incidence of Alzheimer's. So there's all these things out there that we're trying to piece together, but no, we don't have the whole puzzle yet.
Yeah. So now what is one thing if, you're thinking that maybe this could be something that's going on in a family member, how important is it to see a doctor right away?
Well, I think it's very important because you really want to get that diagnosis so that you can get all your hands on deck about how we're gonna handle this, so that you can talk about everything from medications, and it's certainly important that folks with Alzheimer's have an advance directive that tells the family members what to do as they are unable to make their own decisions down the road. And oftentimes, family members get put in the tragic position of having to decide, do we put a feeding tube in because grandma just won't eat anymore? Those sorts of things. And so having those discussions early, even though we might not have the great disease-stopping medications, but we can definitely get a plan in place. We can definitely start to challenge that brain so that it'll stay working as best as possible, and then we can plan for the future, which is just very important. It's so much easier whenever you have one of your family members who still has enough orientation to give input to what they want in the future than it is for everybody to be standing back not trying to make a decision on whenever they're not sure exactly what she or he might want. So
interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining me this
morning.
We're going to put all of this information on our website, ktvo.com, and we'll be right back.